Hold your applause so you've tasted all the wine. How's it going, guys? It's great to see a lot of you again. We have a lot of very familiar faces, a couple new faces in. So, as Patrick said, I'm John Maggi. I represent a company called Vias Imports. We're actually celebrating our 41st year in operation. We are Italian-owned, Italian-operated, based out of the city of Trentino in northern Italy. And since we were founded, we've only imported Italian wines from small to medium-sized family-owned producers. And you know, when Vias got started in 1983, there was 2 companies bringing Italian wines into the U.S. Today, there's almost 200 companies bringing Italian wine in. So we really have been there since the absolute start. And we've kind of kept our focus since then on the native varietals of Italy, which for us is always the most important thing, because Italy, if you may not know, has more native varieties of grapes than any other country on earth combines. You know, approaching the 600 number. They kind of always go back and forth every year as new ones get discovered and other ones turn out to be something that someone's grandfather named it, you know, gave another name to something else that they already knew existed. But when you compare it to a lot of the other countries around Europe and the rest of the world, it really does, you know, it's well over triple or quadruple the amount. So how do we think about the first wine you guys have tonight? Beautiful. So we're starting on one of my absolute favorites, one of the ones I'm personally very biased towards. This is Otella's Lugana. So has anyone here had a Lugana before? So it's one that we're starting to try to get a little bit of recognition in the world of, you know, the world of wine right now. It's a little flip-flopped on your page. It's the only mistake I'll make tonight, I promise, for now. And that is actually number 2 on your sheet, but number 1 wine that you're drinking right now. Lugana is really unique within 2. No, it's on the map. On the map sheet, it's number 2. There we go. See, I have a method to my idiocy. So Lugana is a really unique wine region in the fact that it straddles 2 different regions of Italy. As you know, Italy has 20 different regions, and each one really has its own culture, its own language, its own styles, its own wines, and its own native grapes. Lugana is the only wine you'll find tonight that covers 2 different regions, and it covers the regions of Lombardy and the Veneto. Because Lugana is really not so much about regions, so much as it's about the lake. Lake Garda is Italy's largest lake. It straddles those 2 regions. It's kind of shaped like a giant teardrop. It starts way up in the Dolomites, very narrow, with the mountains hemming in on either side. And then it goes to the south of the lake where Lugana is located. It's this broad, flat plain that kind of continues until you get towards central Italy. And that really, you know, the lake is the entire story with Lugana. Because basically when you had glaciers carving out this lake millions and millions of years ago, all the rock, all the mineral that it deposited that these glaciers dropped off, all ended up at the base of the lake where these vineyards are today. So that's why you get this really brilliant, beautiful minerality coming out of this wine. And for me, it's my favorite kind of wine to start off a tasting with, because that little edge of bitterness, minerality that you get right at the back of your palate kind of starts your palate watering a little, makes you want to have a little bite of something, makes you want to have another sip. You know, it's really kind of the perfect thing to prime our palates as we go into all these wines that we have tonight. Otella is run by the Montresor family, and I apologize tonight. We have a little technical difficulty, otherwise you'd be seeing how beautiful the lake is. But just use your imagination. It's Italy we're talking about. You all know it's beautiful. You got it. You know, the Montresor family, who's behind Otella, was one of the first 6 families to create Lugana back in the 1960s. The grandfather of the current owner of the winery started it. And, you know, you'll see tonight as we go along, we talk about a lot of these properties. You know, Italy's not like France or not like Spain, where you've had estates that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years and have been famous for hundreds and hundreds of years. Sure, there's always been winemaking happening for thousands of years in Italy, but the families who have been making these really never hit the kind of world stage, if we want to call it that. They were never doing this as a profession, really until you got to about the middle of the 20th century, really until you got to the second half of World War II. Prior to that, wine always remained a really agricultural idea in Italy, and it still is to this day. I mean, Italy is the #1 wine producing region in the world. We always take that over the French, even though they go back and forth year after year, but, you know, we're biased towards the Italians tonight. And it really remains at the center of the Italian culture, you know, something that's really, it's an agricultural item, it's a food item, more so than it's any kind of big economic, cultural tour de force. It is all those things as well. But at the end of the day, you know, the wine is something to be on the table. So we like the first one? Very good. Very good. So we'll enjoy that one, and then we'll go over the stats for it.
So it's $23.99 and 12.5% alcohol.
And guys, you'll see on your sheet tonight, we do have 8 different regions represented. I mean, that is really kind of the crux of the class that we're going over tonight, is highlighting all these regions. Everyone knows Piedmont, everyone knows Tuscany. We'll run into some really great wines from those regions later on, but I want to highlight some of these other regions. And even going past that, I want to highlight wine categories from those other regions that you may not be as familiar with. So even for this first one, when we talk the Veneto, sure, we can have an Amarone. It's only about 45 minutes by car away from where Lugana is, but let's talk a little bit about Lugana. Let's talk about something about a little less known, a little bit less familiar to you. All right. Yeah. Ready to go for next?
I feel like we're all light down this.
Yeah, we're very cozy towards one end. So, guys, does anyone have any questions about the Lugana as we go through that one and we go on to the next one?
I like that one.
It wasn't very cold. Is that the way you want to serve it?
You know, so this is a major. It's a very good question, especially. Yeah, and especially as we talk about, as we talk about white wines, there's this idea that you always want the whites to be really, really cold, and that's, of course, it's the most refreshing way to have them. There's no argument with that. If it was, 85 degrees out and we're all sitting outside, I definitely want these things as cold as you can get. But as the wine starts to warm up, it starts to release aromas. It starts to show a lot more. The body starts to get a little bit richer. Having a wine ice cold, you're really limiting it down to its crispness and its freshness, and that's really, just about it. It's a great bone of contention with William Miller because he likes his wines absolutely ice cold. And if you're a salesman trying to sell wine to him and you show up in the middle of July with a wine that's not an ice cube, it makes life a little bit difficult. But that's one of the joys of the business. So I do like having things a little bit, to me, you should have it a little colder and then let it start to warm up a little bit in your glass. So then you'll start to see things come out of it and see the wine start to open up and expand. This is really, the classical pairing with this is fish, especially freshwater fish, because you're in northern Italy. So this is a lot of rice dishes, a lot of risotto, a lot of spring vegetables, potatoes, things like that. I think all of those things this wine works absolutely beautifully with. Salads, white meats, even just a lot of mixed cheeses and mixed salumi. I think it actually does a really nice job. It holds up well too, also. But to me, this is kind of the classic like aperitivo wine. It's the perfect thing to kind of get things started and go from there. So, all right. So now we have our second wine in the glass. So now we're going over to the region of Sardinia, to a winery called Nuraghe Crabbione. For those of you guys who were with us last year when we did our class, we actually featured the red from this winery. It's a winery we've been working with now for about 7 years, and we've been really happy with the results of how they've come out. Sardinia is a totally wild concept in Italy, right? It's in terms of language, it's the closest living language to Latin. It's got more in common with Latin than any other language. The people are just like the Basque people. They're a genetic isolate. They're more related to themselves than they are to any other population of Italians all across Italy. And it shares a lot of this really, really ancient pre-Indo-European culture that was around since well before the Greeks, well before the Romans. And part of that is in the name of this winery, Nuraghe. So Nuraghe in Sardinia are these dry stone towers that almost look more like you'd see them in like Machu Picchu than in the Mediterranean. And they really, everyone looks at them and you see these amazing old towers. And you're like, what did they use them for? What could these have possibly held? Are these temples to some odd sun god? No. You put sheep in them, and they still put sheep in them. So, that part's never really changed. They're a practical thing at the end of the day. But Sardinia's got a very powerful reputation in Italy for being a really rustic region. Today, it's becoming incredibly popular for a lot of kind of the Mediterranean jet-setting community, if you want to call it that. For vacations, especially along the coast. But once you go about 20 miles inland in Sardinia, you're back 250 years in time. Nothing's really changed. Fortunately for this winery, we're staying very close to the water. Nuraghe Crabbione, all the vineyards here are less than 300 meters away from the sea. And that, for me, is really the highlight of this wine. Vermentino is a very Mediterranean grape. You have it planted in Sardinia. You have it planted all over the western coast of Italy. You have it planted in southern France. And in all of those areas, it takes on its own kind of personality. It takes on its own style. In southern France, it's very rich. It's very kind of blousy. You'll find it blended into all your favorite Provençal rosés. In Tuscany, it gets very kind of melony and a little bit kind of fatter and rounder. But in Sardinia, my favorite style, it gets salty, it gets briny, you know. And for me, when we talk about pairings especially, this is your oyster wine. This is your little necks on the half shell, you know, clams casino, you know, linguine clams, whatever you want to call it, anything shellfish involved, that's this wine. That's the idea. You should be getting hungrier as we go, you know? Yeah, we're going to start linking up with local restaurants to just have you go there afterwards. Use my promo code. But, you know, there's this idea for me, especially because Nuraghe Crabbione only makes 2 wines. They make the Vermentino and they make a red called Cannonau. The red is very gamey. It's very kind of wild and herby. Vermentino is very salty. For me, those 2 wines, and for Nuraghe Crabbione as well, they represent the island of Sardinia. You have the sea and you have the inland. You have kind of the scrubby, hilly inland. But I hope you guys enjoy this one. I think this is really one of my, yeah.
How do you get there? I know you can fly, but are there ferries from Italy to go?
There are ferries. You can take some ferries from Tuscany. I think most people fly. Now it tends to be easier. It's like, depending on where you're flying from, it's only about an hour flight. You can fly from Pisa to like Alghero, which is one of the bigger cities there, and that's about 45 minutes.
Oh, okay.
It's not nuts. If anyone does want to go to Sardinia, I highly, highly recommend it. I also highly recommend going in the on season. As someone who's been there in February accidentally, it's a beautiful island, and you'll have the whole thing to yourself. Yeah.
Do you find olives on this island?
Yeah, you find a good amount of olives on this. I mean, it's Italy. You find olives everywhere. You know, it's not as heavily olive oil producing as regions when you get further down south, right? When you start talking Sicily or Calabria or Puglia, those tend to be a little bit more so. But you do have quite a bit of. It does get hot. I mean, especially when you go into the hinterlands in Sardinia. I mean, it's we're not talking Sicily hot. We're not talking kind of Calabria hot, but it still gets pretty warm over there. Sardinia is also famous, along with a lot of other islands around the world, for being one of the major blue zones. In fact, Sardinia was the original blue zone. If everyone's familiar with that concept, those are zones where they've found more people to live above the age of 100 and above the age of 110 than in any other place on Earth. And Sardinia was actually where the idea was first kind of based. And today, a lot of the common places that share it in common, Sardinia, Okinawa, they're for a lot of reasons, they all tend to be islands. They all tend to be places where people are doing a lot of physical labor, bless you, and eating a lot of fish and eating a lot of olive oil. And, well, fish, at least in Okinawa's case. Does anyone know why they call it a blue zone? It's my favorite fun fact. It's because they had a blue pen when they were zoning them out. Yeah, so, yeah. But a red zone doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well. Red zone kind of doesn't give you a good idea. But, so...
Is their food is quite different from Italy?
Yes, very different. It can be very rustic. You know, you'll see a lot of goat, a lot of sheep, a lot of goat's milk cheeses, sheep's milk cheeses as well. Obviously, you're getting a lot of fish around the coastline, but the food itself, once you get especially a little bit more inland, tends to be a little bit more wild, a little bit different. And they also have some of the most unique pasta shapes of anywhere else in Italy. They have these shapes that you don't really find anywhere else. And they all sound very difficult to pronounce, casaredu and casarecce, things like these. They're really fascinating. It's actually, when you look into a lot of them, if you really want to go down this great pasta rabbit hole, there's a couple accounts on Instagram that'll go into one of them's Pasta Grannies, and they find all these old women all across Italy and all these tiny little towns, you know, making these types of pasta that they're in a lot of them towns are they're kind of the last generation to make them as kids have gone to the big cities and stuff like this. And every episode with Sardinia is always fascinating because they have some that, you know, they have this one kind of pasta that looks almost like a piece of like a woven cloth. You know, where it's squares of pasta of all tiny little threads of pasta woven back and forth together. It looks like it was on a loom. It's really, really amazing. You know, if anyone ever wants to try and not have to go too far to try Sardinian cuisine, there's actually a fantastic restaurant up in Torrington, of all places. And the owner actually just relocated out of Brooklyn a few years back, and he opened up a restaurant called Geppetto's. And he's a Sardinian who was raised in Rome. And he's got this great blend of Sardinian and Roman cuisine. If you ever find yourself, it's about an hour drive away from here, 50 minutes, and the food is absolutely fantastic. So that was my plug for the day. Yeah. There you go. Guys, any further questions on the Vermentino before we go into the stats?
What's the hint of floral?
getting licorice, but I'm usually wrong. So I
Yeah,
usually
well,
go to the least.
I'm usually wrong too. That's why we're such good friends too. Now, this one gets a lot of these really kind of delicate flowers, these really kind of delicate white flowers starting to come in. It doesn't get super herbal in ways that I think the Lugana can sometimes pick up, or in ways that the other one does. For me, that brininess is always such a big part of this, that any of that little, kind of floral tone is just very, very delicate kind of white flowers coming in on the back. Come up with a white flower, whichever one you like is good. Here you go. I like that. See? It's white clover, not red clover. That's where we take it apart, And we have the stats on this guy.
So it's $19.99 and 13%.
Now, there you go.
This is gonna be a good one for this summer.
This is a great one for this summer. And what you guys are actually drinking, this is actually interesting as we talk about Italian wine. The vintage you guys are drinking on this wine is 2021. There's this idea that for white wines, you want them as fresh as physically possible. You want them to just be kind of like pressed and sent over, especially with Italian wines. This has always been the opinion with Italian white wines. But this is a wine that's now got, 2, almost 3 years on it in terms of from when it was released. And it's showing beautifully. And this is a wine that really, by all accounts, you would think is something you want very fresh because it's very light, very crisp, and you got all that kind of saline character to it. But this is something with a few years on it, and it's still showing, it's still powering through, it's still going great. So keep that in mind for white wines. What they really do, if they're built well, they can get through those first few years really, really well, and the really great ones can get through the next few years really great. That's kind of the new frontier of what our Italian producers are trying to put forward to us and having us put forward to all of you, is that white wines can age well. Especially when we talk about white wines from the north. Because in Italy, sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't, but especially among the wine drinkers and the wine aficionados, that's something that they're starting to do quite a bit of. And it's all about kind of as Italy's progressed into more and more and more of a serious wine country, because there's always an idea for a lot of French whites that they'll age and they'll last. And you can have French whites with 10 years on them, and they're fantastic. But that was never the case for Italian whites. Italian whites really had the longest journey to get to the really being taken very, very seriously in the world of wine. So to me, I find it really interesting that we're just starting to get there. So
This one, it really is a very good place. I had one of those moments 6 or 8 months ago. And I'm trying to think of who was doing the class for this, but started talking about the ageability of Sancerre, and I sort of scoffed. And then they pulled out one that was 15 years. Let me tell you, it was like
and it shows,
amazing.
yeah,
It was like,
and it works,
I miss that.
yeah, and it works fantastic.
That's part of working with Williams.
Well, exactly. He likes his wines white and fresh, and that's, once again, he likes them really cold and he likes them really fresh. And I show you guys wines that are a little bit warmer and a little bit older. So see, this is how we do it. That's why he's not here. There you
This
go.
one's is holding up very
Thank you.
nice.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
gonna knock
we're gonna get
Percentage between white and red now in Italy, you gotta guess.
in terms of production.
bread and some,
That's a tough one.
perhaps a little meat.
I would say, I'll say in terms of exported wine, because I could speak to that part a little bit better. I would say in terms of exported wine, I'd say it's maybe a 60-40. Yep.
In favor
That's
of red?
In favor of red. And the white by far is Pinot Grigio. White is only as large of a percentage as that is because of Pinot Grigio. Who wants the best recipe for oysters Rockefeller on God's green earth? Assault this man in the parking lot and steal it from him, because he has the.
This one, right?
This one, yes.
Those are my favorites.
Yes.
Really.
All right, so you guys pick at that. We'll start to get the third wine out in front of you now. We'll go from there. This will be our next white of the evening. So, guys, obviously cheese and salumi, any kind of cured meat, that's always a very hot topic, always very contentious topic with Italians, especially because everyone's going to always prioritize the cheese and the meat from their own region and their own sub-region and their own province and their own town. And the worst possible product that exists is the one made in the next town over, because those people are savages, not like us. But really, every Italian wine, and this is something I end up telling people ad nauseum, more so than any other country on earth, Italian wines, doesn't matter if you have a $5 bottle or a $250 bottle, they always show better with food. And to me, that's not something that holds true with any other country. You can have an amazing Grand Cru Burgundy. Is it going to be great with food? Yes, it's going to be great, but it's also going to be amazing on its own. So it's going to have all the bones for it on its own. Italian wines, to me, they are almost made with a missing piece, right? Where you want to have that food with them. You want to have it. It just takes that last 2% into perfection with every great Italian wine, is having that little bit of food to go alongside it. All right, so now we're gonna get into our next wine, our next white. This is a wine that got a really bad reputation throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s and really started to come back a little bit. And we have Orvieto. So has anyone here had an Orvieto before in a large bottle? And, it was okay and it was fine. Went right along with your, fish bottle Verdicchio and your Bolla Bartolino. Yeah. So Orvieto kind of fell into this really mass production time for Italian white wines and carried that way through a lot of the 20th century. And what you have now is a lot of producers who have really changed up their tune on how to make it and really work to make significantly better white wines and really more serious white wines. And especially when we talk about Orvieto, but it's actually true for a lot of different areas. It's actually true for Lugana as well. The biggest problem came because a long time they were producing these wines with a grape called Trebbiano. So Trebbiano's, there's nothing wrong with it as a grape. It's, highly productive, makes very pleasant, very easy wines. But its biggest problem was that it was highly productive. So if you were a farmer, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, and you wanted to make a lot of wine, you could plant a lot of Trebbiano and get a lot of grapes. It was not a lot of work to result ratio. The problem with Trebbiano is that it can really easily just make these very flabby wines, make these very basic wines that don't really have a lot of great nuance to them. They're just great, easy table whites, but they don't do all that much else. Really, ironically, Trebbiano actually found its really best showing in France, where it goes by a different name called Ugni Blanc, and it's actually used to make cognac and Armagnac. So the French used it the same way. They said, we got a ton of this growing, makes solid wine. What can we do with it? Let's make brandy with it. That's perfect. So in central Italy, in Umbria especially, where we are next for this wine, Trebbiano was always king. That was really always the king varietal. But you had wineries like Argile with the Di Cosimo family. When Giulia Di Cosimo, who's quite young, took over the helm of this winery, she really started to switch it up. The Orvieto DOC permits a lot of different grapes to be grown. Doesn't have to be Trebbiano, just no one really ever put the work in for it. And she was one of the producers who really decided to work with a lot of these other varietals that maybe they're a little bit more difficult to work with, but they yield much better results. So now this wine's a little bit of a kitchen sink. You have grapes called Grechetto, Drupeggio, Procanico, some very, very foreign grape called Sauvignon Blanc, and another grape that you've definitely never heard of called Chardonnay. Because those are actually permitted in very small quantities, but they are permitted. And they do bring these really nice little hints to the table for the wine. But the majority in this wine is those first three that I said, Grechetto, Drupeggio, and Procanico, which I hope you've never had before. If you have, you can come up and deliver the rest of the class yourself. And it's really about, this is really where it kind of harkens back to our company and our kind of ethos of working with varietals that are a little bit less known and a little bit more rare, and promoting these indigenous Italian varietals. And it really goes to show that producers who do put in this little bit of extra work and work with things that maybe their great-grandfathers used to work with before their grandfather and their father said, let's do a little bit less effort, we need to make some money. Kind of bring these things back yields a much, much better result. So argile is Latin for clay. These vineyards are really, really deeply rooted in white clay that you'll find around Orvieto. That's what gets this wine these really great aromas. Gets a lot of fleshiness and richness to this wine is that clay soil. Argile also takes that a step further. One of the coolest projects that I know of, they do what a lot of wineries are doing now, and they're aging some of their wines in amphora, the big clay jugs that look like they came out of Roman ruins. They're a great vessel for winemaking. The Romans used to use them for winemaking, and now they're getting a secondary revival because they're more porous than stainless steel, but they're not as porous as oak. Argile takes it one step further. They've got all this clay in their vineyards. They actually use the clay from their vineyards to make the amphora themselves that they age their wines in. So you've got a full circle process going on over there. So, guys, what do we think of this wine? Yeah. I think hopefully what you'll find with it is it starts to occupy a field you don't see as much in Italian whites, is that this is a little bit fleshier, a little bit fuller bodied, a little bit richer. And for me, especially as we talk pairings, this is something, we start to get away from the seafood and just kind of the picky foods and aperitivo style that we had with the first two wines and get into things like white meat, like roasted chicken, roast chicken with a lot of rosemary and potatoes, things like that, root vegetables. This is a white, as we're still in kind of, late winter, early spring weather. I think it's a white that actually works really well in that category. It's got a little bit more bones in it to kind of hold up.
I think rabbit also.
Rabbit would be, that would be.
That would be in the area. Right?
Oh, you find, got a lot. In fact, rabbit is in the area. Yeah, it's it does. And rabbit is, rabbit's perfect. Rabbit would be the absolute perfect thing to have with this. So
It's also when Jan and I were there, when we were in the town of where we had to go back to the cheese plate, cheese and salami and that kind of thing. Bread, olive oil on the table in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
It worked really well.
Yeah, it still remains, even though they've tried to get these more kind of complicated varietals in it and really give this wine a lot more complexity than it used to have, it still remains a very easy wine. Still very easy, very drinkable wine, which I think is the biggest part of its appeal. I do? Oh, fantastic. Perfect. So, I just drink. So guys, what do we think of the white wines? Now we blitzed through those. We'll get on to the reds, the famous wines, the ones we are all really here for after this. But my heart's always in Italian white wines, and it's one of my favorite things to introduce to people. So we like them? Yeah. Well, what was sort of the favorite of the three? Everyone shout out at once so we have a confusion.
First one.
Yeah. Perfect. Oh, good. That's great. Perfect. Listen, the Lugano is fantastic. And if you guys like that one best, that makes me really happy. A, because we're one of the only states in the country that still have the contract to sell this right now. So we got to make a really good show so we can get it in the rest of the country. And my family's from like 15 minutes away from this winery, so it's very, very rooted in there. And if anyone ever gets the chance to go to Lake Garda up north, everyone goes to Lake Como because that's what's really famous and that's what's really well known. Garda's fantastic, and you won't see any other Americans. You'll see a ton of Germans and Dutch. And the Italians will be way more happy to see you because the Germans and Dutch don't spend any money. So, yeah. Yes.
I will say this, coming off of the winter right now, coming into spring, we're coming into the warmer weather, spring and summer, those three wines that you just showed are right on time for planning for our upcoming season.
Yeah, I think so.
And you're right, you're at least your first couple.
I think our
right in that vein.
yeah, I think we planned it out pretty well. Yeah.
Good selection.
All right, guys. So we'll get the stats up for this.
That's $19.99 and 12%.
Yeah. This is a wine I always find very interesting to have the fact that it's actually a little bit less alcohol than the one before it, even though it shows a little bit richer on the palate. There's actually less alcohol, which is just a fun fact. All right.
So great acidity.
Yeah. And that's the hallmark of, it's a hallmark of Italian wines in general. Italian whites especially, but Italian wines in general is that acidity. It has to have that acidity. If an Italian wine doesn't have acidity, it's not, it's no good. You're not going to find it. All right, and now we'll get to our very first red.
Nice. Do I remember where?
So guys, this red that you have coming around right now, this is actually, you guys are the first people, the first Harry's customers to be tasting this. We actually brought it in fresh for the store today. Took a little bit of, showing and telling William, come on, you like this. This will work for the class. This will be perfect. And it does. So you have all to tell me you like it, so I'm validated. This is one of my absolute favorite wines to show. Especially coming into the spring, especially as Patrick and I were just talking, coming into the warmer weather right now. When we talk about red wines, this is it, 100%. This is Frappato. So we're going all the way down to Sicily now, and not just to Sicily, but we're going to the south of Sicily, down to the southern coast of the town of Vittoria. Because when we talk about Sicilian wine, usually one grape and one grape only comes to mind, and that's Nero d'Avola. That's the ubiquitous red varietal of Sicily. If you go anywhere in Sicily and you have a red wine, 9 out of 10 times you're having Nero d'Avola. But when you go down south, when you go along the southern coast, you run into a little bit of Frappato. It's very light. Yeah, guys, hold it up against your paper. Take a look. This is as dark as this wine really should ever get. And for me, it's a red wine that you almost want to treat more like a white wine, where you want it released as fresh as you can have it. You guys are drinking 2022 vintage on this. You don't want to give it a lot of time in oak or anything like that. You want it just to be in either stainless steel or concrete, fresh pressed, vinified, and sent out to the consumer. Thank you.
Would you put a little chill on this?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That's a very trendy topic in wines right now. Is light reds that you can put a little bit of a chill on, and I fully buy into that trend because it's the best. Get a wine like this, take it out. Leave it in for half as much time as you left your white wines in. Maybe take it out 20 minutes before you start drinking it or so. But especially when we get into the summer, we get into the warmer weather. I don't care what you have on the grill. I don't care what you have on the table. This wine will go with it. For people who want to do red wine and fish, salmon on the grill with a decent amount of seasoning on it, with a wine like this with a chill, you're fine. That'll work. No problems there. So with any kind of cheese, any kind of salumi, it's great. White meats, red meats, it's all over the place. You can go really Sicilian and do like a really fat tuna steak on the grill. That's, a lot of capers and black olives and stuff. Come on, now you're working. That works. So a lot of you guys may be familiar, you may have seen, I know these guys next door, and she's really done a lot for the area, or if you've watched Stanley Tucci, there's a woman, Arianna Occhipinti, who really became famous in this part of Italy for producing wines, especially producing frappatos. Her frappatos really are the ones that kind of brought this grape to the US, brought it to kind of the forefront of ideas. If anyone watches the Stanley Tucci Sicily episode, he does a great featurette, and she does quite a bit of talking about frappato. We don't work with Arianna Occhipinti's wines, but we do enjoy them ourselves in our personal time. But what's great about that, to get my edge in, is this is about a third of the cost of Arianna Occhipinti's wine. So if you like one of those, buy that, buy one of those to have on your special occasion. But this is the frappato that you can have 7 days a week, all day. You can have multiple bottles. You can have a bunch of family and friends over, and you don't feel guilty that they're drinking all your good stuff. They're still drinking your good stuff. It's just not costing you all that much. There we go.
They don't need to know it.
Yeah. So, but what I love is that these are two completely different style frappatos. She is one of the best producers in the world, especially in Sicily of frappato. She does an amazing job. But these are big, structured frappatos that age beautifully. They've got a lot of this really deep, complex, really serious tones to them. They're amazing wines. They're fantastic. But, really, like going back to what I said before, at the end of the day in Italy, wine's all about, it's all about the drinkability. It's all about being able to have something that you have on the table with all different kinds of food. And it doesn't have to be a big event every time you're drinking it, right? And that's what I think Santa Teresa accomplishes really, really well. In terms of production, these guys are completely organic, completely vegan certified, carbon neutral, using recycled glass, cardboard, paper, basically going the whole shebang here. Organic farming, because this is something we get a million questions about. I know these guys get a million questions about. That's becoming a really hot topic in wine right now. All across the old world, France, Italy, Spain, a lot of producers are practicing organic certified within the EU. When you make the jump into the US, a lot of them don't end up paying it because that's something we see as importers. The price, which actually just went up yesterday, of having a wine certified organic in the US is really, really, it's incredibly expensive now. This is why it's a great thing to really ask your producers. We're lucky enough to have some producers who do go the full mile and do say, you know what, we're going to spend the extra money. We're going to put it on our labels and say, completely organic certified, good to go in the US. But there's a lot of producers who are guys who are maybe, smaller families, couples who own their own little piece of property who say, look, we don't have the money to pay the FDA. We're good enough. We're certified in Italy organic, which is actually more strict than the FDA. Why are we going to spend a whole lot of extra money on every single bottle that we send to the US? Because at the end of the day, that usually means that the bottle leaving the winery costs about €2 to €3 more than it did if it didn't have the US certification. And €2 to €3 leaving the winery, by the time it gets here, that's a decent chunk of change that you're adding onto your bottle.
Are you able to state that it's certified in Italy?
No.
On the bottles that come here?
Nope. No. There's
So wrong.
yeah, that's so there's certain
It is. It's certified.
problem is it has to be certified here. There's certain things, it's starting to get very, they're starting to put a whole different kind of process in there, and you're finding a lot, especially in Italy, a lot of these other categories are starting to come in where they're going sustainable or they're going bio, with a little B on the back of it. But really, at the end of the day, what it ends up turning into is the work is on our part, educating these guys, and it's on their part, educating you guys. And that's where it comes in. So that's why, I mean, obviously Harry's has always done this really well of being great at talking to you guys and educating you on the wine and the story behind the wine. And that's because we're in there also talking to them, you know, and bringing everything down. So it really comes word of mouth down from the producers through us to them, and hopefully to you guys at the end of the day. So, you know, obviously if it's on the label, we love it. If the extra work's gone in there, makes our lives much more simple. But for most of them, it really isn't, you know?
John, apologies if you said, what would you serve this with? Because this is very.
Whoa, this is just whatever you want to serve this with.
Really?
Yeah, this is, I mean, if you want to do fish, you know, especially heavier fish like sand, like don't go, you know, super light, like, you know, any kind of, you know, don't do any Dover sole with this. I don't think that would work. But fuller
One of
bot,
my favorite fishes is Arctic char.
Arctic char would work. Yeah. Arctic char, especially on the grill. So it's got a little bit of char for the Arctic char. That would actually go really, really nicely, especially if this wine's got a little bit of a chill on it.
But otherwise, you would stay with white meat.
White meat, red meat, pasta. I mean, Sicily,
Pasta, yeah.
Sicily. So we're talking a lot of olives and capers, things like that. This goes great. I mean, I've had a very difficult time finding something that this wine does not go with. I also, you know, and I'll talk about it even more as we go through to the bigger wines that we have. I lay very much on the side of when you're having like a big cut of red meat or something. There's the idea that you can have a big Napa Cab or, you know, some big Californian wine that's full of oak, full of fruit, full of booze. But for me, I go on the leaner side, and I want something that's a little bit lighter, a little bit leaner, a little bit higher in acid, because that cuts through the fat. It cuts through the richness of a dish. I don't want rich and rich. I want rich and lean. You know, something that kind of cleanses your palate really, really well as you go.
I'd also say this. This reminds me a lot of a.
Oh yeah.
So something that I would take last night's dinner that I'm bringing with me, chicken or something like that, that's in the refrigerator. This would be in the refrigerator right next to it. Pack up the basket, head out for the day. By the time you're ready to sit down and have your meal, it's an hour later. Temperatures come up a bit. It's helped to keep the chicken or the meat that you have in your basket, the olives, the cheeses, that kind of thing. It's helped to keep it cold, and then you spread it out on the picnic table, and
Exactly.
you're sort of ready to go. And it will fit across a very broad spectrum.
I think it really will. It's, you know, guys, give it a shot. Grab a bottle. You know, I dare you to find something it doesn't work. You know, go for it. Exactly. So what do we think? Any final questions on this before we go on to the next red?
This is a dumb question, but what American red would most closely resemble?
It's a very good question, because that is actually a direction that you're seeing a lot of American reds start to go. You know, it used to be the only thing you could touch from America that would get close to this would be like a Pinot Noir out of Oregon, which does share a lot of the same components to it. But now you're getting a lot of these younger producers, a lot of this new generation of producers in California, working with a lot of these grapes that were planted since Prohibition that no one did a lot with, things like Valdigue, old plantings of Grenache or even Barbera. And they're making these really, really light-bodied reds, these really great chillable reds. These guys have a few over on the red blend section, on the organic section as well. They have a few interesting ones. There's actually one over there called Got Grapes, which has a fun little cartoon on the front label. It's kind of a kitchen sink blend out of California. It's awesome. It's great. You drink it and you do not think you're drinking a Californian wine. And I mean that in the best possible way. So, yeah. All right, so we'll get into the stats for this one.
So it's $16.99 and 13%.
So I would compare that to the Ocapenti. Two different wines. But the Ocapenti that he was just talking about, that's $45.
Yeah.
As compared to 17.
So,
and that has a bit to do with exactly what you were talking about, and that is that certification.
Yep.
You know, adds dollars and dollars and dollars without doing much else.
Although these guys do have the certification as well, but it's on both
What's
sides.
that?
These guys do have the certification as well.
On the other side of the...
On the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have bottles of both in my cellar. I'll put it that way. All right. So now, guys, take a lot of basically everything I was talking about just now in terms of chillable reds, light-bodied reds, things that are great for the summer, for picnics, and now transfer that again to the next wine you're about to have. This is a wine from Calabria. Has anyone had a wine from Calabria before? Perfect, perfect. I'm waiting for the day I ask that question. Someone says yes, and I have to shut my mouth. Calabria is a really funny... No, you don't count. You don't count. And you've had this one, so that doesn't count.
Is there a place you haven't had wine from?
So Calabria is a really funny story in Italy because it's a region that's given a lot to the U.S. It's given a lot of culture. It's given a lot of food influences. A lot of anything spice-driven, especially heat-driven. It's also given a lot of Calabrian chilies. That's one of the most famous things from this area. Induja, that really kind of soft, spreadable, spicy salami. That's native to this region as well. And it's given a lot of people. So a lot of Calabrese Americans, especially in the Northeast. In kind of few different parts of Connecticut. Westerly Rhode Island's got a ton of them. It's gotten an ungodly amount, as my boss would say. But it's a really, really funny region because what we've never found from it has been wine. It's always been one of the toughest regions to find wine from in the U.S. Even for us, this is the only Calabrese producer that we actually work with. And the reason being for the long time is that this has always been one of Italy's poorest regions. And poverty and difficulty of making exportable wines is always something that's gone really hand in hand. We're very fortunate that Cantine Stati that you guys are drinking right now, we're really able to put this together, but the Statis have always been a little bit different. Bless you. The Statis are an old noble family. They're barons, actually, the Barone Stati. They were barons in the Kingdom of Two Sicily and the Kingdom of Spain before that. They have about 5 centuries in this particular place under their belt right now. They're in a town called Lamezia Terme. Lamezia Terme is a really, really beautiful seaside old Roman bath town. That's where the Terme part comes into the name. Terme is Italian for baths. It's a gorgeous spot. You look at a picture of it and you say, why haven't I vacationed there before? And really the reason is that this has always been a part that has never really been on people's radar as much as a lot of other parts of Italy. The grape that you have right here is called Gaglioppo. Gaglioppo is a native-ish Calabrese grape. It's been planted in Calabria for about 2,500 years. Before that, it actually came from Greece, which a lot of southern Italian grapes did, and a lot of grapes from Calabria came from. Because Calabria was part of, back when you go in the pre-Roman era, it was part of what the Greeks called Magna Graecia, or what the Romans called Magna Graecia. And this was basically all the Greek colonies, all up the eastern coast of Sicily, all throughout Calabria, Puglia. You had a lot of Greek cities, a lot of Greek settlements here, and the Greeks got a lot of winemaking done here. They brought a lot of grapes over themselves. They brought a lot of techniques over with them, and then they used this area as really there. This was the Napa Valley, 3,000 years ago for the ancient Greeks. The culture stayed, the grapes stayed. Today, there's actually a lot of Greek-speaking populations in Calabria. They're called the Greco communities. Today, the most common last name in Calabria is Greco, which literally just means Greek. So it's certainly a culture that's left a lot of influence on Calabria. And the grape that you'll see before you, to me, is one of the best examples of it. This is really kind of one of the main red grapes of Calabria. You're not going to run into it that much, as I said. If you do run into it before, really the main famous Calabrese red wine is called Ciro, C-I-R-O. If you see any wine from Calabria, you see a Ciro on the shelf. That's also made from Gaglioppo, but that usually has things like Cab, Merlot, Cab Franc blended in, and it typically sees a lot of oak. This is a whole nother game. This doesn't see any oak. It's just 100% Gaglioppo with just a lot of time in stainless steel. And once again, you guys are drinking 2022 vintage. So all the same things I said about the Frappato apply here. You want this wine fresh. You want it juicy. You want it easy. What I love about this, especially as we were talking about Willamette Pinot, this has always been for me, as cliche as it is to say, this is Southern Italy's example of a Pinot Noir because it shares a lot of those same components to it. It's got that really great kind of Bing cherry note to it, that really kind of fresh strawberry, almost kind of that little kind of cranberry edge to it with the acidity. But then there's some herbs behind it. You get these kind of sage, rosemary tones coming in behind it that kind of, to me, let you know it's Italian. This is a fun one to do if you have foods that have a little bit more heat to them, especially, not just because we're talking about Calabria with Calabrian chilies, but because it has the fruit and it has low enough alcohol that it'll gel really, really well with things that have a little bit of heat. This is, same rules apply as the frappato. Throw a chill on it, bring it out for a picnic, throw it up against basically anything that you take off the grill. I think the wine show's really, really fun. And it's got a little bit more oomph to it. It's got a little more power. If you do find something that maybe the frappato was a little bit light for, the Galliopo is what you downshift into from there. What do we think about this?
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a fun wine.
Taste the ocean.
Well, this is, and La Mezzia Terme, you know, in the same way that we had with the Vermentino, the vineyards here, right on the water. So, and especially because they're on the Tyrrhenian Sea, so you're having the breeze come in from the west, the breeze is coming in. That all that influence is being left right on the grapes. You're getting that constant breeze blowing in from the sea, keeps the acidity bright, keeps that little mineral edge, that little kind of saline edge on the wine really, really bright, and it just makes it so much fun. So, guys, this is the only winery we're showing tonight where their main job is not making wine. It's really their side project. The Stati family, for the past century and even before that, what their biggest project has always been has been olive oil. These guys are the largest owners of olive groves in Calabria, one of the most organized crime-ridden countries. So I'm not asking, I'm not explaining, I'm not doing anything involving that. But when I say that they're a very powerful old baronial family, that's it right there. They have trees going back 800 years. They're really amazing, amazing to see. The olive oil they make is outstanding. They do the first press olive oil, which just happened, which we just got some bottles to the office not that long ago. It's like emerald green. You can't see through the bottle. It's amazing. It's outstanding. Our company typically send our company about like 60 bottles or so because we have about 60 employees. We have 20 people in the office and they each go home with 3 bottles. So, you know, yeah, I keep sending them my home address and they won't do anything about it. But so if you do ever get the chance to try it, or really just any really high quality olive oil, of which these guys have quite a bit on their shelf over here, I highly encourage it and I highly encourage checking it out. So, all right, so we can go on to the stats for this wine.
So it's $19.99 and 13%.
Perfect. So once again, we're trying to keep the percentages really low in terms of alcohol. 13. Yep. So if you look at it that way, this is the exact, this and the Frappato were the same alcohol percentage as the Vermentino. So it's really all about keeping it very light and fresh. We're not talking big 15% alcohol, which is becoming a more and more difficult thing as we get, you know, along every year, because it is only getting hotter and hotter, and heat ties into alcohol. So, all right. So guys, anyone have any questions about this wine before we start to move on to the next one? No? Feeling good? All right. Perfect. All right. Yeah.
All right.
That's my favorite. I want to get up there with it.
It's interesting you say that about Calabria. It's hard to find tours or companies that promote it.
It's hard to find a lot with Calabria.
Yeah.
It really hasn't been marked down into place. What?
Yeah.
Send the rest of it? Oh, okay. You got it. So, yeah. So it's
Puglia, which is now very
yes,
common,
and
10 years ago.
well, and that's exactly it. And there's a lot of thought that maybe that's going to happen with Calabria as well, maybe in the next 10 years. You know, the thing that Puglia doesn't have that Calabria did historically have was Puglia didn't have the history of organized crime with the 'Ndrangheta in there. So that kind of put people's minds a little bit more away from going to Calabria, kind of turned people off a little bit. And Puglia it's almost like the way you watch it is, it's where the Italians go to vacation, and then it's where the Europeans go to vacation, and then it's where the Americans go to vacation. You know, it's like a 3-wave colonization of all the best beach spots. Because Puglia is, you know, hot. It's where everyone's going. If you have the chance, but this is what that means. That's great is that Calabria is kind of still untouched.
Right.
So go check it out. Be the first to see it. And look up Lamezia Terme. Google Images. Take a look. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. Our CFO is from very, very close to this winery, and to hear him talk about it is just, you've got the plane ticket already purchased when you're there, and he's a CFO, so that makes it even worse. So, all right. So we started to talk about some of our lesser known regions, get a little bit off the beaten path. Now we're going to wind our way back to one of the most famous regions of Italy, and we're going to go up to Piemonte. And we're going to get away from, some of our lesser known wineries and get to what is for us probably our most well-known winery, probably our most famous winery, our most awarded winery, and probably, without picking any favorites here, probably our most important winery. This is a winery that's been with us since day one. So we're over 40 years together with these guys. And this is the Produttore del Barbaresco. If you guys are longtime customers of Harry's or even part-time customers of Harry's, there's a very, very solid chance you've had wines from this winery before, because Harry's is probably the #1 customer of the Produttore. I learned about them for the first time when I was working here, and now I get to represent them on the quasi-national stage. This is really the winery that built the village of Barbaresco. So when you look at it on the map, you have the village of Alba, city of Alba, in Piemonte, in right, kind of actually, I actually managed to get the 6 right on where it is on this one. Alba's a really old city. It's home to a few different things. One of them, one of the most notable of which is the Ferrero Rocher factory. So the whole city smells like chocolate and hazelnuts, which is amazing. This is where Nutella comes from. It's where Gianduia. It is true. It actually is. You open up your hotel windows, the whole thing smells like chocolate. It's awesome. And Alba is kind of the central location for the Piedmontese wine industry, because you go 15 minutes to the south of Alba, you have Barolo. You go 15 minutes to the north of Alba, you have Barbaresco. So this is the epicenter for the grape Nebbiolo, which is already was one of Italy's most famous grapes. It's becoming even more so. This is probably the fastest growing category in Italian red wine right now, is the Langhe Nebbiolo category. Langhe Nebbiolo refers to basically any base level Nebbiolo made within what we call the Langhe, what the Piemontese call the Langa, which is this great stretch of basically river valley that encompasses both Barolo, Barbaresco, and the whole area around the city of Alba. As I said, the Produttori really founded Barbaresco themselves as a region, and even though we look at them now, you go into a liquor store, you see Barolo here, you see Barbaresco there, it's like, column A, column B, potato and potato. Barolo has always been the more famous of the two. It really wasn't like that. There's a lot of difference and a lot of history between the two, because Barolo was famous since the late 1800s. When Italy unified in 1871 for basically the final most complete time, Barolo was already working its way up to be famous. It was already seen in the courts of France. It was already seen in London. It was already seen abroad. Barbaresco at that time didn't exist. Now, there's a lot of reasons for it, and they're all Italian. The first prime minister of Italy, Camillo Cavour, the guy who really kind of worked to make the king of Piedmont and Sardinia the king of Italy, he was from Barolo. That always does a big part. You got to represent your hometown. Like I said, the worst person in the world is the village next to you, and Barbaresco is the village next to you. His mistress owned a castle in Barolo. That is the winery of Fontana Freda, which still exists. It's no longer anyone's mistress there. This is the end of the 19th century. So this is 1870s into the 1880s. So in 1894, a bunch of producers, along with the village priest of Barbaresco, got together. They assembled like 5-8 families together and said, I think we make really great wine here. I think we can do this. We can really get on the stage. And they went to a lot of the big winemaking families in Barolo, and they said, hey, we want it. We want it. Because at this point, Barolo had about, 5 or 6 different villages, places like Serralunga, Monforte, famous villages even now in Barolo. And they said, we want to be another village. So you can go buy a bottle of Barolo, and, this bottle's from Serralunga, this bottle's from Barbaresco. And all the producers in Barolo said, nah, I think we're good. If you guys want to sell us any of your old grapes, we'll take those. We'll make some wine with that. Sure. We'll give you pennies on the dollar for it. Scudi on the lira, or whatever they had at the time. So Barbaresco said, nah, well, we'll do it ourselves then. A few things got in the way. Basically, I don't know if you know anything about continental Europe in the first half of the 20th century, but there was a few different things happening. First World War, rise of fascism, Second World War. all these things really kind of put a halt on the processes these guys were working on. They just ended up being farmers and growers making kind of local vino di tavola for a long time. And then in 1958, the grandsons of the same guys who got together in 1894 all came together a second time, and he said, you know what, let's really do this. Let's really get together. Let's do this. Let's put some families together. What we'll all do, we'll all turn in our own grapes. We'll make one wine. We'll split the proceeds. This is post-war Europe. This is post-war Italy. They did not have any money to do this. This was also a cost-saving venture. It turned out really well. Today, they're the most, cantina sociale is the word in Italian, social cantina, if you want to call it, social cellar. They're the most successful one of those in Europe. They built themselves up from being 50 very, very poor families to those same 50 families being among the most wealthy of Piedmontese grape growers. Because at the end of the day, they are grape growers. They're not winemakers. They hire a winemaker. They have one guy. They were very, very smart in 1958. And they said, instead of 50 different people all saying, well, I think we should make the wine this way, they hired one guy. One of them had a university degree, 1 out of 50. This guy, Celestino Vacca. He had a university degree, so they all went ham and they went, all right, Celestino, you have the degree, you're going to do the winemaking. He said, okay. So, and today his son, Aldo Vacca, these guys know very, very well. Anytime he comes into Connecticut, this is the first stop we make, is still today the directing manager of the winery. And, to hear him say, he goes, I'm not the boss of 50 families. I have 50 bosses. It's a very different game. But what's really great is they really built up Barbaresco outside of this. They were kind of growing alongside another famous name, if you've heard it, Angelo Gaia of the Gaia Winery. He was a big figure in Barbaresco, but he always kind of did his own thing. The Gaia family was doing their own thing. We hesitate to say that they built Barbaresco because Gaia built Gaia, and they did a great job. They did a fantastic job. Those wines are absolutely amazing. But Barbaresco always focused on the village. So the Langhe Nebbiolo you guys have in front of you is really unique in that it's a category that most producers use their lesser quality grapes to make, because this doesn't have to be aged as long, doesn't cost as much. So you can use, if you have grapes from a vineyard that's a little bit younger, it's a little bit lesser quality, didn't get the best sun exposure this year, yada, yada, yada. You say, you know what, we'll throw those into the Langhe Nebbiolo, charge half the price, only age it for 6-8 months, and you know what, we'll sell it. We'll make some of our money that way. The Produttori are very different. Every single bunch of grapes that goes into the bottle of wine you're drinking now is one less bunch of grapes that goes into the Barbaresco that they make. So as Aldo Vacca will put it, for every bottle of the Nebbiolo that you're drinking, there's one less bottle of Barbaresco that you can make. So that's one less bottle of a wine that's twice the price, twice the value. And that's because for the Produttori, it's not about having your lesser quality stuff, your higher quality stuff. It's not about making do with what you have. It's about making two different expressions of wine.
So this is, John, one of the most fascinating things. This is one of those vineyards that sort of starts in your heart, and then you work out to the sort of quality. When you know the backstory, the idea that this was an idea that came about in a very poor and desolate area before World War I, in a church in Barbaresco up on the hill that got sort of put on hold because of World War I, and then World War II came, and all the sons went out to fight. And when those eras ended, the new priest at the church up on the hill was in the basement, going through the catacombs, and found the history of this idea. We all went together. He was talking about, John was talking about Calabria and trying to find wines from Calabria, which you cannot do. The reason that you can't do that is because everybody's poor. There's no marketing. There's nobody coming in and looking for this stuff. These guys did it the opposite way. The Vacca family, who was hired to be the winemakers, remembered when they got this opportunity after World War II and said, we're always going to do this. We are always going to do this from the village. I can tell you, Jan and I were there a couple of years ago during harvest time, came up into the village, and Aldo was very, very kind to us, took us out to lunch. When he decided it was lunchtime, and all of the tractors that were lined up literally all the way down the road with the grapes on the back, getting ready to be weighed and have their grapes tested for quality, went to lunch because that's what we were doing. It's about the village. You can't, it's hard to describe if you haven't been there. If you haven't actually, there's a million stories in the wine world. I'll tell you something that is that's happening right now. 25 years ago, to say that you were organic was like the kiss of death. It just meant cheap, crappy wine and not well handled. It was probably going to be effervescent in your glass just because it was turning and that kind of thing. Well, now to be certified organic is like the holy grail. So guess what? Everybody's organic, or is using the organic practices, or trying to pick up on this kind of stuff. And this idea is sort of similar to that. These guys had this, it's more than 100 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically almost 130 years ago they've had this idea.
Yeah, so when this idea came about, it got put on hold, But since they've done this, since they brought it together and they said this purgatory, this village is going to create these wines. I mean, everything that they've done has been for the betterment of the growers around them. We bring everybody along, and for the betterment of the history of the grapes that they work with, that they produce. And in this case, it's Nebbiolo. These guys, if you're in Barbaresco, the Proditory is what it's about. Gaia is also a very important figure, but they needed each other. I think Gaia needed them a bit, and they needed Gaia.
Yeah. Well, Aldo Vaca, the guy we're talking about now, the managing director, these guys, he spent the first 25 years of his career working for Angelo Gaia. So there's no, it's not a, it's not one of these. The buildings are literally right next to each other. So there's no, there's no competition. It's a great kind of symbiotic relationship in the way that the very, very best Italian wineries have with each
And
other.
it's still done in the church. I mean, the church is one door over, 2 doors over.
Yeah, it's right there.
It is right there.
Everything in Barbaresco is right there. There's no, this is like, it's the entire central piazza that they fill up with all the crushing machines and everything during harvest is basically the size of like the Harry's Plaza. It's not big.
It's not big.
No.
It's the same grape as the Barolo.
The same grape. This is 100% Nebbiolo. Every grower who works for the Proditory, works with the Proditory, is a member of the Proditory. They only grow Nebbiolo. That's that's a contractual agreement. If you're a member of the Proditory, you can only work with Nebbiolo. It's also because it's the most valuable grape. And that's actually what we're seeing now. And something I've been talking to these guys about is that Langhe Nebbiolo is the biggest category in wine now. It's growing. And to talk to some of the producers in Piedmont, they have guys in places that never used to grow Nebbiolo, ripping up the vines they had there. If they were white grapes like Arnaz or Dolcetto or Barbera, they're ripping up those and planting Nebbiolo because it's a cash crop, and you can make this wine right here, Langhe Nebbiolo. You can make it anywhere. It's the Langhe appellation is very, very big. So that's really, as you start looking at something that's becoming more and more available on the shelf, and there are more and more different kinds on the shelf, that's when it's a really great time to start being particular, with your shopping, being particular with these guys, and really trying to find out the details. Because Nebbiolo is not an easy grape to work with. It's like Pinot Noir. You can't just go and plant it and make a good one. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort. And when you get to something like this, the Langhe Nebbiolo that's been made the same way since the 1950s, still from the village of Barbaresco, not from, the backside of a village that used to make, something else. They used to make vermouth. It's really where the difference starts to be. And that's where it kind of gets fun for us, because in this kind of evolutionary change of Italian wineries and the Italian wine market, seeing something that holds on. If you want to know how Barbaresco's tasted 60 years ago, almost 70 years ago, taste any wine from the Proditory, because they have not changed anything about it. The only thing that's changed is the climate. It's the only thing. So the wines are a little bit richer than they used to be, a little bit fuller. You can drink them now without waiting 10 years, but that's entirely because of the climate. There's no other reasoning behind it. While we're on the Proditory is the last thing. You guys have seen, I'm sure you've seen the straight Barbaresco next door. It's got a big yellow label with the Castle of Barbaresco on it, the Torre on it right there. In the very, very best years, they produce 9 single vineyards, the Crus, the Reservas, which are all white labels. They will only make those in the very best years from 9 vineyards within the village of Barbaresco. There we go, perfect. I knew he was going to grab that. They will only do all 9 vineyards, or they won't do any of them. And it has to be a good enough year to not only make the single vineyard wines, but only make the single vineyard wines if there's enough good quality grapes to still make the yellow label one, still make the basic one. For the same reason that they're making a bottle of Nebbiolo, even at the cost of a bottle of Barbaresco, they're making the single vineyards at the they're not making the single vineyards at the cost of a bottle of Barbaresco. They're only making it if they can still make the flagship wine great. Because once again, for these guys, it's not about just kind of squeezing it for every last drop of money they can do. It's about what's doing well.
I've had a wine that somebody referred to as a baby Barolo.
Yes.
Would that be this?
So that's the Longa Nebbiolo category. Okay. That's the, we kind of did it to ourselves where we all start. So this is the main Barbaresco. This is the main wine. Nothing about this label has changed since the 50s, basically. And then this is the single vineyards. Ovello is one of them. They really only make them in the best years. 2017 was the last one, and 2019, which is actually coming out in the next couple of weeks. Part of the reason that these guys like having someone working for the suppliers that used to work for them is they get a very healthy portion of a very allocated wine. But we like to take care of them. You'll notice every bottle is numbered, and every bottle on the back, which is one of my favorite parts, tells you which families supplied the grapes to make that wine, which is fun.
Yeah, up the village, and in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different families that contribute grapes to this.
Yeah. Some have like 1 or 2 families. Ovello is actually one of the biggest vineyards, so it has almost 12 families. But yeah, so the baby Barolo category, and you'll actually see it for the next wine we have as well, baby Barolos and baby Brunellos. This was kind of something we did to ourselves because we used it as like a great marketing tool. And, we used it, salesmen used it, stores used it, and they said, oh, this is a baby Barolo. Then we talked to the producers, and the producers are like, oh, we hate that term. That's a terrible term. Why would you ever say that? Because the idea is, once again, that there should be 2 different wines. It's not, it's its own wine, It's not that one's better than the other. It's one's to have now, one's to put down the line and wait to age, one's to have when you're having this, one's to have when you're having that. So it's a difference in style there. As we get to pairings, Nebbiolo, this is classic. This is one of the most kind of classic pairings in Italian cuisine. Is this and truffles. Nebbiolo and truffles is, you do not get better. This is Alba's where the white truffles come from. Basically all the same vineyards as this. At the base of the hills, you'll find the groves where the white truffles grow. Anything mushroom related is great. Any cow's milk cheeses, really richer, higher in fat cheeses. I'm sure Tasha will agree that those work very, very well. Rice, heavier pastas, things with a lot of cream, a lot of cheese, a lot of butter. We're in northern Italy. We're very close to the Alps here. This is not tomato country. This is, this is kind of heartier, more, actually cuisine for a night like tonight actually works really, really well. So what do we think about this, folks?
Very good.
Very good.
What are your specs?
Perfect. Perfect.
Tell us about that one last one. Yeah.
Oh, so there's the hard to get wines, there's the harder to get wines, and there's the very, very, very hard to get wines. So Don Fiorino was the priest who came back in. There was the first priest in 1894. Don Fiorino was his successor at the church in Barbaresco back in 1958 when it was reformed. He was really one of the major guys to get the whole process started, to get all these growers together and get them working together. Don Fiorino is a limited edition wine they've made basically, I think, about 4 times since the 60s. And what this is, in especially great vintages like 2016 was. 2016 was one of the best Italian vintages ever. Doesn't matter what kind of wine it is, from where, from who made it. Doesn't matter what it was. If it was from 2016, it was great. This is a select blend, even on top of the vineyards here for the selected cruise here. They took basically 4 of the vineyards they thought did the best in 2016. They did a selection from that and made this wine. They made very, very, very little of this wine. I don't even know if they said how little, but they made very little. To give you an idea of how little they made, we got, I think, 8 3-packs into the state of Connecticut, and Harry's got 5 of them. So he can't say we don't take care of them.
Yeah.
This is really for us we're not a company that talks about like culty wines and our must-have wines and our big, our big like golden crown jewel blue chip type wines. That being said, that is for us one of probably the most important wines that we've sold in the past 10 years.
And how much are those wines up there?
Patrick, how much are those wines up
That's
there?
very good. I think this one is about 50. It's
You're $49.99 on that. $79.99 on that.
And we've got a very good price.
You do have a very good price. You are literally the only game in town with it. So
I have to say, look, because I don't know. Is it 100?
I think it's about 120.
Which one?
Yeah. So it's for the people who are really serious about Nebbiolo and really want to collect. These are the wines. But this, I just challenge you to find a better $50 bottle of wine, $50 bottle of Barbaresco.
So one of the really cool things is the vintages that they make these wines in. Pay attention to those vintages, because those vintages, it doesn't end up in their normale. Any other vintage, it ends up here. So if they haven't done these single vineyard wines, it all ends up in this bottle. To John's point, there's not enough Nebbiolo out there right now. We are regularly finding this problem.
Well, for us, it's a problem.
Yeah,
We make our money on it.
And that is, there's just not enough out there. And I'm going to give you a one. Can I see the nut that we just poured? So this is a 2022. John came in tonight to let me know that there are
7 cases left.
7. So listen, we've already taken a position on it. We've got some wine over next door. But there are only 7 cases left for now. There might be one more small drop before the fall time.
Yeah.
So if you like this one, we just
Bring it home
Right.
frequently.
They do.
Yeah. Twice a
um,
week.
yeah, something like that. But this is, I can tell you, I stand by this one. I really like this one. But between now and September, there are about 20 cases to be had.
Yeah. They're
Period.
not bottling the next vintage until September. And we asked them to bottle it early and they don't want to. So
Yeah, they won't do it for us. For you.
yeah, for me.
Not for us.
I get to find something else to sell you in between now and then.
Great moment for your fontina if you have
There we
any
go.
of the fontina left, an Italian alpine cheese there, so you've got that going together. Great option with this wine.
Do this with
Yeah.
you in the future.
Yeah, this is
What are the
fantastic.
specs on this?
Oh, and now the specs on this guy.
So it's $24.99
Which is
Sorry?
$24.99 and 14%.
It's stupid.
There you go. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
All right.
No, this
So-
thing, Jenna, I'm telling
We
you,
just had it last night.
yeah, it goes home with us on the radio.
What'd you have it with? Just
We just
sitting.
Yeah.
That's the best way to have it.
He's saying this is perfect for food. And in fact, one of the things that we've done this with on a pretty regular basis is mushroom ravioli with brown butter and sage is like a go-to for us for this. Lydia's veal chop is an amazing choice.
Even my mushroom meatloaf.
Mushroom meatloaf. Yes, it's true. All of those things we've experienced in the relatively recent.
All right. So we had our Piedmontese interlude now. So we'll get back to the world. We'll go down to the next most famous of Italian wine regions, and possibly even more famous than Piedmont, and we'll go to Tuscany. We'll go to wine number 7. Lydia's veal chop. I don't ask him any more questions about Lydia's veal chop because he'll keep talking about it, and
Yes, I will.
it is very good. So, kind of riffing off what we were saying about kind of the idea of baby Barolo, this is the next category into that. This is what, up until recently we used to sell as baby Brunello. This is a Rosso di Montalcino from the village of Montalcino, and this is, I'm going to finish this. So this is Barici. So Barici is the newest winery for us from Montalcino. If you guys haven't had, I think most people here have had a Brunello before. Most people are familiar with that concept. It's actually the first DOCG in Italy. It was the first wine in Italy to hit the top legal classification for wine back in 1961 or 62. Don't quote me on that. And that's the other thing. Once again, the Italian wine history, the wine law history in Italy is not old. You know, my parents were born in '62, so I have to say it's not old. It's not. It's very young. It's very recent. It's very recent. It's very young. It's very fresh.
You said your parents were born in this?
I don't recall saying that. So anyway, so Montalcino is this really cool area because Montalcino is situated right in between the village of Siena and further down towards the Tuscan coast. It's one of what you find a lot of in Tuscany, these tiny little Tuscan hill towns. You have ones like San Gimignano, Cortona, all of these. You know, they each have their own little kind of claim to fame, their own little thing they're known for. Montalcino was a really interesting one because up until really kind of the middle of the 20th century or so, basically up until Brunello became a winemaking category, became something people knew, Montalcino was one of the poorest parts of Italy. This was and this is Francesco Buffi, who's the third generation owner of Barici, the wine we're drinking now, will say this was an area where no one had any money. You go in World War II just after, this was dirt poor. And it's funny to think now that these are probably some of the most expensive wines in Italy, come from this village. Montalcino itself is only about 10 square miles. In those 10 square miles, you have almost, I think about 300 producers or so in here. Got my little map. So every red dot that you see here is a producer of Brunello di Montalcino. So the wine we're talking about tonight, and I can actually pass this around if you guys want to take a look at that. You're more than welcome. The wine we're talking about tonight, Barici, is winery number 1. So Francesco's grandfather, Nello Barici, back in 1961, when the DOCG was created, he was the first guy in line to sign up for the consortio, sign up for the basically farmers collection who made this wine a category. They are winery number 1 in the first DOCG created in Italy. Nello did something really, really smart in the 1950s. You know, when land was still really poor here, he basically took all his family holdings. The Baricis are an old family from Montalcino. They were basically old farmers from Montalcino for years and years and years. He took all his family land, he sold it all, and he bought 4 hectares, which is about 8 acres or so, in the hilltop of Montosoli. So Montosoli is a hill basically just to the north of the village of Montalcino. When you see that coming around, when you see Montalcino on the map, Montosoli is a tiny little hill just above that. Now, that was really prescient at the time because today Montosoli is the only cru in Montalcino. It is the Grand Cru of the Brunello di Montalcino appellation. And it's not that big. It's only about 7 hectares in size, and Nel Barici bought 4 of those. He's actually today the only person to have a winery on there as well. To put it in perspective, most producers have maybe, a couple rows, maybe they have half a hectare, maybe they have an acre or so of vineyard here. And these are big wineries, big famous wineries with big names. And they use that for their top wine, their vineyard selection, whatever you want to call it. Every single bottle of wine that Barici makes is 100% fruit from Montosoli. And that includes the only Rosso di Montalcino made from cru fruit in the Brunello di Montalcino and the Rosso di Montalcino appellation. What's amazing for us about this is that this is a wine that I have to introduce to almost every buyer that I show it to. For being a winery that capitalized, on taking the basically most sought after spot, being the first person to sign up to be a producer of Brunello di Montalcino. When we started working with them for the 2013 vintage, they were basically unknown in the US. They'd never exported to the US before. Nello Barici got raised alongside Biondisanti. I don't remember which Biondisanti. I think it was Tancredi. But they were actually, they were so close that they shared the same wet nurse. I'll put it that way. That when Nello Barici's mother gave birth to him and Biondisanti's mother gave birth to him, one didn't have enough milk, so they spent a lot of time next to each other. To hear the Italians tell it on a Zoom, they giggle a lot more. But it's really almost this kind of like tale of two cities with producers, right? Because you had Biondisanti, which was a little famous before then because they were kind of like the big guys, the big figures. They produced a wine that today, Biondisanti, when you think like top end Brunello, Biondisanti's it. Biondisanti is that's the wine, $250 a bottle, whatever it is now, and it's well worth the money. It's an outstanding bottle of wine. Barici was a lot more kind of close to the vest, a lot more low to the ground. It stayed a tiny family production. Nello Barici ran every single vintage of wine made up until 2012 vintage when he passed away. Today, his two grandsons run the game. His one grandson, Federico, works as the winemaker. One grandson, Francesco, is actually here in the U.S. right now, kind of learning how to be an export manager. And they're one of my favorite wines to show because it's two brothers basically carrying on their grandfather's legacy, which I find really, really cool, making absolutely outstanding wines. So what do you guys think of this? It's awesome, isn't it?
I would say, and we've said it down at this end of the lot table, if you've still got it in your glass, get it moving in your glass. Get oxygen down into this thing.
Yeah.
This thing doesn't stop opening. One of my favorite things about it is the quality of the wine that you get out of here.
Mhm.
You know, it's sort of locked down when you first open up the bottle. We're getting some oxygen in, we're getting some air in here. The nose changes, and every sip seems to develop a little bit more and a little bit more.
Exactly.
And at both the price and the designation, which is Rosso rather than Brunello,
Yeah.
that's got an awful lot.
Well, and that's where we really try to show this, guys, because this is going back to that when we were talking about, you know, the baby Brunello term. Wines like this are why we really stopped using that term, right? Because you're using you're saying, you know, baby Brunello, and kind of, you know, it's almost pejorative in a way. It's in a lovingly pejorative way, right? But you had a lot of wines that, you know, it's the same story as Langhe Nebbiolo. You had a lot of producers with a lot of lesser quality fruit. It wasn't up on the hillside of Montalcino's, from closer to the valley floor. It wasn't as good quality. And they said, you know what? Once again, we only have to age it for maybe, you know, a few months to a year, and we can sell it off. You know, we'll sell it for 15, 20 bucks. We'll make some money. We'll be okay. And then you have producers like Barici, who once again do not need to make this wine. It's just like the Langhe Nebbiolo with Produttore. They could just make Brunello. They only have 4 hectares. It's not enough, you know, it's not like they've got a million grapes lying around to spare. It's a conscious decision on their part to make 2 different kinds of wine. And to me, that makes the wine all the more special. It makes wine all the more better because it's showing that it's 2 different iterations of what this grape can do. You have your version that has much more tannin, much more acidity, that needs its time to come into itself, that can last for years and years. And then you have this wine that you could enjoy now and you can go into. And it doesn't lack in complexity. It doesn't lack in sophistication. It doesn't lack in anything. It's just a different expression.
Are you a national distributor or?
We're a national importer, yep. 50 cents in Puerto Rico.
So how do you decide
Hey,
with
John,
such a small production who gets what?
Who gets what in terms of who gets what wine?
Yeah, no. Who gets how much?
That's a fun game.
Does money change? A little statement.
No, listen, you know, this is for everything that it is, for as tiny a state as we are, you would not believe the business Connecticut does. We like our wine in Connecticut. We outdrink. I'm mic'd up, so I have to be careful what I say about my company. But I will put it this way. We sell more wine than the entire Midwest, including Chicago. We drink more wine than the entire Midwest.
Wow.
There's only a couple states that do more wine than us. And there's also more culture for wine buying here. Listen, we got the money. We're in Fairfield County. We got the money. We're not lacking on that half of it. But we also have the interest. We also have the there's people who want to buy this wine here. So in terms of who gets what, we do okay in Connecticut. We do okay. And for whatever reason, this is a fun fact that to my superior who operates out of Massachusetts will say, Connecticut, for I don't know what reason, loves Brunello and Rosso di Montalcino. They buy more Barolo than us. They buy a lot more Barolo than us in Massachusetts, and a lot more Barbaresco too. But for Brunello, Connecticut is, I think, other than New York, we probably do more with Brunello than any other state in the country. So, and we were one of the first to work with Barici, and we've done really, really well. We're very lucky that I don't know if anyone here was able to attend, maybe. We did a dinner back in December with Francesco Buffi, so the grandson of Nello Barici and the current owner of the winery, along with his brother. We did a small dinner down in Norwalk, and we drank this, we drank his Brunello, and William actually brought the last 2 or 3 bottles they had of the Nello Barici, which is their Riserva that they only make in very, very good years that they named as an homage to their grandfather. And the wines are just outstanding. And it's a very cool property. And it's fun to be able to introduce something to people that are actually, even as famous as it should be and as big as it should be, it is actually still a little bit of an unknown quantity. So.
And I would say, John, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this has ageability.
Oh, yeah.
Here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, when we opened this bottle earlier tonight, it wasn't showing as
No.
beautifully as it is now.
It comes into itself really,
Yeah.
really well.
One of my favorite things about this wine is that when you open the wine and your journey through the bottle, it doesn't stop. It doesn't get to a point and then you say, well, that was, it opened up and it changed and it's got 2 different, I mean, it just doesn't stop changing the whole year.
Yeah, just keeps going. It really does. There's a story that Francesco Buffi likes to tell of his grandfather submitting this because every year when they produce a Brunello, you have to submit it to the consortio. You have to basically, have your first bottle sent over to the committee and have them approve it and everything. And his grandfather sent a bottle of Rosso instead of a bottle of Brunello. And they said this was in the top 10 of all the wines we tasted. That's super illegal, by the way. They do not like it when you do that. But you got away with it. So, yeah. Not a lot. I should know this. You know what, actually, do you have? I'll tell you right now. Because sometimes we actually have. So, total production for the entire winery is about 30,000 bottles. So it's not huge, it's not minuscule, but it's small. For a company like us that we run a national operation, So it's really So it's really it's a pretty minuscule operation in the grand scheme of things. Usually this is something that when we talk about what states are getting in terms of allocations, we're doing well with Barici now. We've really done. They've liked us a lot more in the past few years. We've kind of proved ourselves to them, so they give us a lot more. But at the beginning, we were getting, in a state like Connecticut, we were getting like 10 cases. Those are 6-packs, by the way. 10 cases, so 60 bottles for a whole state. For something like the Riserva, the Nello Riserva, once again, if you're sensing a theme here, Harry's got the lion's share of it. But that's because they did really well with the Rosso and the Brunello, and that was only, I think that was only like 5 3-packs. Once again, it was really, really minuscule production. So
I did a tour of the Brunello region a few years ago. We went to 6 different vineyards, and I was amazed. They all produce olive oil too.
Yes, they do.
So do they do too?
These guys don't. They don't have enough land. They don't have any olive trees where they are. Montosoli is so valuable now that no one has any olive trees planted there. Other producers that we represent a couple different. One called Camigliano, which is far to the southwest in Montosoli, and like the bottom left-hand corner of that, they make fantastic olive oil. That's all certified organic, and it's outstanding. We actually have another producer called Fosicole, who's very, very close friends with the Baricis. He's another one with only about 3 or 4 hectares of land. He actually does all organic saffron because he has 2 fields that by law, he can't grow grapes in because you can only expand your production so much every year. So him and 2 friends planted saffron, those lilies, saffron tulips. I don't know what
they're crocuses.
Crocuses, saffron crocuses. Thank you. He planted those, and he said it was like a 13,000 euro investment, and he recouped it all in the first year. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, it's ridiculous how much. The last time he came to Connecticut, we spent 1 day working, and we spent the second day trying to find someone who would import his saffron. We didn't find anyone, but he still owes me some too.
Interesting, saffron and crocuses. Right now, crocuses are popping up right in a lot of our yards. Doesn't happen with saffron and crocuses. Those come out, they plant them when they harvest their grapes. They plant the crocuses. The crocuses come up, have these, I think it's 3 or 4,
three. Yeah.
Stamen that are the saffron itself, and then after they die off, you then have to go back out there, dig those crocuses back up, take care of them in your cellar again till next year.
So when do they bloom?
And we saw them blooming when we were.
Oh.
Do you remember when we stopped when we left Pecanino and we drove down? We were coming down off the hill, and I pulled over next to that. Remember?
They were the two people filling their pockets. Yeah. Yeah.
I got to tell you,
Yeah.
it was very tempting, but I did not. I wanted to take the pictures because it's the antithesis of what you expect from crocuses.
Right.
You have to put these in the beginning of the fall at the harvest time, and you get them around the Thanksgiving time, and then it's a little bit before that, probably. So it's end of October.
Yeah.
Right.
Per Stefano, the guy who grows them, he said it's the worst work in the world. He said, I wouldn't wish that work on anyone to pluck the stems. But he
I
keeps
planted them in my yard one year.
worse than
I
trouble.
didn't take it back. But I did get some. Remember we got some saffron and made some paella with that.
So as we wrap up the saffron discussion, we'll give you the stats for this wine, and then we'll move on to
So it's
Number eight.
$49.99 and 14.5.
And when we talk about pairings with this wine, guys, it's 100% Sangiovese, which means anything tomato related is going to be really, really friendly with it. Wild boar, if you can get it. Pork or beef or veal, if you can't. Anything like that. Steaks. This is a steak wine. I mean, you get a Fiorentina steak, a big T-bone about the size of like 4 of your fingers put together. Those are all really, really, really great things. Yes. Well, these are the white cows. These are the Chianina beef, the best. All right. Yes, back there to the right. Yes. Come back in at an awkward time. So, guys, the next wine we have up, you can try to hold it if you want as it comes around or after we finish pouring. I think this is about the same weight of glass as every single other bottle put together. This is like a mallet made into a bottle of wine. Cover my mic. No, it's. I have no idea. And I've asked this winery why, because glass is not cheap. This is like €5 worth of glass, which most bottles are like €1 worth of glass. The reason is because it's nice. Because we like it, exactly. Which is when you work with Italian producers, you'd be surprised how many answers are because we like it when you ask.
People who are not elitists,
Yes.
the way they select a wine is the weight of the bottle and the depth of
The punch.
they think it's more quality.
Well, that is,
Just instantly buy it if it's heavier.
and that is. Well, and that's 100% true, especially for these guys, because this is only their 2 most top-end wines go into these bottles. So they really identify very
They see it as a quality.
Yeah, they see it as a quality thing. They see it as, the wine's a lot fancier because it's in a heavy glass bottle. I'm not sure if it's true, and quite frankly, I'd rather spend I'd rather take that price of glass off the final cost of the wine. But, that's an American perspective versus an Italian perspective. So, we just had 2 very, very common Italian wine, or 2 very popular Italian regions, I should say. 2 very well-known Italian regions. And we're going to end back off where we started on something a little bit less well-known. Yes, please. And we're going to end up with a wine from Le Marche. So Le Marche, you'll see it as that little orange region right over there. If you look at it, this is a region that touches, I think, almost more regions than any other region in Italy, because you're sharing borders with Abruzzo, Lazio, Umbria, Tuscany, Emilia-Romagna, and you're encompassing within that, you're sharing borders with San Marino, one of the tiniest countries in the world. The Marche has always been surrounded by really, really famous Italian winemaking regions, and it's never been as famous as any of those. Now, a lot of that is that all these other regions had really grapes that they identified with and they were famous for. Abruzzo to the south had Montepulciano. Tuscany to the west had Sangiovese. Emilia-Romagna had Lambrusco. But the Marche also makes a lot less wine. The Marche makes less wine than any other region in Italy. And it's not a small region. You guys see it on the map. There's certainly regions that are tinier. The Marche makes less than 1 million liters of wine every year. It makes only about 800,000 liters. There we go. That's the part that's good for you. So it's a really it's a region that's never really had a lot attached to it and going for it. Really, for the most time, the only thing it ever had that it was really known for was Verdicchio, was the wine with the fish bottle, the old white wine in the fish bottle. I used. Okay, a couple of people are good. When I say that and no one knows what I'm talking about, it's really bad.
It's like the Chianti, the straw bottle.
Exactly. So what you had as a result of this, when you go back to the 1980s, this is a time when a lot of people are leaving the countryside, moving into cities, kind of setting up their own operations. The Marchigian regional government was setting up a little bit of a program where if there was young people, students, recently graduated students who wanted to move back into the countryside, restart in the agricultural field, you'd get subsidies. So Angela Villanozzi was one of these people. She was in '84. She was, I think, 21, and her husband, fiance at the time, moved back to their hometown of Ascoli Piceno, which is all the way at the very bottom of that little orange region, right where the 8 is located, and it sits right on the border of Abruzzo. And they started up a winery named for her husband's family called Villanossi. Villanossi is a really fun one when we start showing this wine to Italians, because Villanossi is probably the least sellable name in terms of wine. Villanossi in Italian translates to poisonous, exactly. Yeah, veleno is poison, Villanossi is poisonous. So it's a vino Villanossi, it's a poisonous wine. But it's the last name, so what are you gonna do? So when they started back in '84, they started making one type of wine, a type of wine called Rosso Piceno. Rosso, red, from the town of Ascoli Piceno. The wine is always made from a blend of 2 grapes that you might have heard of before, Sangiovese and Cabernet. Because where you look at it on the map, you have Abruzzo, a stone's throw to the south, some fantastic Montepulciano. In fact, in Marche, they'll actually argue that their Montepulciano is a little bit better than the ones from Abruzzo. Once again, worst person in the world is the person right next to you. And then to the west, they have Sangiovese. So they've got this perfect historical crossroads of these 2 grapes always coming together. And they're 2 grapes that work really, really well together. You know, Montepulciano gives you your fruit, gives you your depth, gives you your richness, your intensity. Sangiovese gives you your leanness, your polish, your elegance. So they were making this wine for a few years. They did very, very well with it. It's really the wine that kind of built their winery. They started adding other wines as they went along the line. In 1993, they produced the first vintage of Roggio del Filare. Kind of very, very roughly translates to kind of rays of sunlight, kind of meant to evoke the rays of sunlight coming through the vineyard. It's a little bit more in kind of flowery, poetic language here. This is basically their Rosso Piceno Superiore. It's the exact same in terms of classification. It's the exact same as their main everyday $13 bottle of wine, with the sole exception being this is only from the oldest vineyards that they have. These are at least 50 years old, ideally more. And the bunches here, I went to these guys last September. I visited their winery. I visited this vineyard. Bunches of Montepulciano you have here are massive. They're like bigger than my head. Big, huge bunches of really, I mean, I don't know anything about what's a good grape or what's a bad grape by looking at it. They all look like grapes to me. But these were like, you see those and you're like, oh, those are probably really good grapes. It's really in-depth, concentrated. I mean, you look at the color on this wine, it's just ink. It's really, really rich and really intense. It spends about 1.5 years in brand new French barrique barrels that go on to be used the 2nd and 3rd times for other wines at the winery. So this is only really the best of the best. This is for a country like Italy that usually makes about medium-bodied wines. This is about as full and rich and as close to California as we're going to get, right? You know, it's got a decent amount of oak, a decent amount of alcohol, a decent amount of fruit. Those are all things that you'll find with your favorite wine out of California. You know, but the tannins, the acidity, they're there, they're present. It's still an Italian wine. It's still a central Italian wine. You've still got those little threads running through it that unite it with hopefully a lot of the other wines you guys have had tonight. This is a wine that, we don't really stand on a lot of the kind of awards or anything like that, because you look at Italian wines, everyone's got their own award. There's like 50 different critics that no one's ever heard of, all coming up with their little gold sticker to put on the thing. But the one we do, the one we do trust in, the one we do go by, is really the top Italian award for wine, and that's from the Gambero Rosso, which is Gambero Rosso is kind of the wine it's kind of the wine critic, restaurant critic, food critic. It's like the Michelin Guide and the Wine Guide wrapped up into one, but it only concerns itself with Italy. And every year, the Gambero Rosso picks a list of wines that classify as tre bicchiere, 3 glasses. Those are really considered the top Italian. Those are, if any Italian producer, any Italian winemaker, anyone respects any award given out, that's the one they respect. Rocha del Filare has won every single vintage since 1993 that's been made. There was a couple of years in there where they didn't make the wines because it was rainy, it was cloudy, it wasn't good weather. Every other vintage in that, this wine has won. And for a region like the Marche, where there's not a lot of wines anyone's really heard of coming out of it, there's not a lot of production, significantly less than almost any other region in Italy. For this one to really take that every year is something that we do respect. It's just not another kind of 92 points from who knows what. What do you guys think of this wine? It's a lot of fun, and not just because you can club people with the bottle if you want.
We need a second mortgage to buy it.
No. Yes. This is in Le Marche, so it's number 8, the orange region right over there, right in the center. Yep. Yeah.
How much is this a bottle?
Oh, yeah.
This empty?
Yeah. It's too much glass. They should not be making a bottle of wine this heavy. Yeah.
How much is it a bottle?
Well, we can go into those right. James, we get into the.
Yeah, for $59.99 and 14.5.
Yeah, just for you, Jim. I got it in the trunk. There you go. 14, Jim. 14.5. 14.5.
Yeah.
So the Villanosi winery is today. It was started by Angela Villanosi. She still runs the winery. Her daughter Mariana, who was born in 1993, first vintage of this wine made. So they grew up together. She is running the winery as well. They are both very, very involved in not only winemaking, but also being very prominent women winemakers, female winemakers in Italy, which is a category a significant amount of winemakers in Italy are female. That is a thing that they are. The sense of smell when it comes to wine is better. I don't get into the science of that, but it's true. And Mariana is part of a very, very cool group that started that includes about 6 different producers that we work with. And it's called Spadbatelle, which is Italian for basically the new vines that you plant in the ground. And that's all female winemakers. Used to be 25 and under, but now they all got a little bit older, so now it's 30 and under. And yeah, we're yeah. But it's yeah, these are the original vines when they purchased the winery. Some of them were still in the family. I think the youngest vines they have are about 50 years old. Yeah, very low production on this. I think you're in the thousands in terms of bottles produced. The winery itself, Villanosi, they make a decent amount of wine because they make basically every appellation in the Marche they make. But this is the smallest production of anything that they do.
Old vines are
Yes, yeah. Always, any old vine is going to be lower production because that's why old vines are so valuable, because the fewer bunches coming, the more concentration in each bunch. And even past that, you'll even still have, even with old vines like this, you'll even have guys going through the vineyard and still cutting maybe half of the bunches off to get more and more concentration into those remaining bunches. So it's about getting as much concentration as you can, unless you're trying to make money, in which case it's about getting many bunches as possible, So, all right, and that's what I got.
Excellent.
Does anybody have any last minute questions for John?
Great.
8:52, not bad.
You